G2G Consulting. So I'm Liz Powell. I am the founder and head of G2G Consulting, which stands for Government to Growth. We work with a lot of nonprofits and others to help them access government funding and opportunities. And we started this Shauna M. Sorrells program just 2 years ago now, and we're really excited to see it take off. And we want to talk to you a little bit more about it, and then give you tips on and insights and things that you can do to increase your chances for winning not just this award, but for other government grants and government funding opportunities. So we're going to cover a little bit more than just the Shauna M. Sorrells program, or what we call SMS program. So with that, I think we can go to the next slide. This gives you an overview of what we're going to cover today. And as each person speaks, they'll give a little bit about their background, just so we have some context. And then we're super excited to hear from the winner from last year's Shauna M. Sorrells program, Seeds of Literacy. I think that's something that's really unique this year. We're going to get to, you're going to get to hear directly from the winner about what they did in the application process. So hopefully that'll give you some additional insights as you work on this next year. So with that, I think we can go to the next slide. Okay, so just a little bit about us. So G2G, we're in DC, Cleveland, and Columbus, but we also do a lot of work in other states. And again, our sole focus is really making a difference in the world by connecting people to government. And so we've raised a lot of money over the years in grant funding, and that's something that we want to share today, some tips on how to access some of those dollars. We do a ton of advocacy campaigns. I think when you're trying to get funding as a nonprofit, advocacy and education about what exactly you do and why there's a need is really, really important. So those are really interlinked in everything that we do. And, you know, I myself used to work in government before starting G2G, and I did a lot of health and social policy work, staffed a couple different interesting committees, and I'm a lawyer and I have a master's in public health. So definitely do a lot in that space. But it's really the team at G2G that has made this focus of making a difference, working in advocacy and helping access government funding so successful. And so I'm excited that I'm joined today by some of my colleagues, and they'll give you their background, but it's really cool meeting all these different nonprofits, finding out what you're doing and making connections to government. That's something that we're all really passionate about. So with that, we can go to the next slide. Shauna M. Sorrells. So these are some pictures of Shauna. Shauna is really important to us because she is actually the mother of my eldest son, my stepson, and she suddenly died in the fall of 2019. And it was actually after we did this amazing trip to Ghana, which is where my husband is from. And you can see in that bottom picture, she's standing. Actually, we did this trip all together. That's a great picture of her on top of that. But I always want to say a little bit about Shauna because she's the whole reason that we're doing this. She, I mean, not only do I have that family connection, but she also was just one of the most amazing people I've ever known. She touched so many millions of people across the country because she was the national director for housing at U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. So at HUD, she rose up from an intern all the way up to running the entire public housing program. So pretty amazing. She went on to she was like a national speaker. She worked for the Montgomery County Housing Commission. She just did a lot of amazing different things. She also served on boards, and she just was a really kind person. She was brilliant, but also very kind and silly, and like all these amazing qualities. And so I always really want to make sure that we talk about her because she's what has inspired this program. She did a ton with housing, like how she calls herself forever a houser, but she saw the interconnections and was engaged in all the different aspects. So if you don't have your health intact, if you're not getting quality education, if you don't have job training to get a quality job, if you don't have transportation to get to the job, like all of that is connected to housing. And so she and I even worked on making some connections around STEM education through public housing. So she got the full picture, and I think she would be pretty excited to see the nonprofits that have come to light through this program. And so everything we do is in honor of Shauna. And so her wonderful son, Isaiah, who is my son, he's in school right now, or he'd be sitting right next to me. He and I give out the award every year, every fall. And so we are hoping that this will last for many, many years. So with that little background on Shauna, we can go to the next slide. And this is her quote: "Words are just a start, action is what is needed." So we are really excited to work with nonprofits that are ready to take action. Next slide, please. And then this gives an overview of the program. And am I passing to you, Greg, or am I still doing this one? I'm sorry.
No, you're good. Keep going.
I'm still going?
Yep.
All righty. So we launched this in 2020 after she passed, and the focus is to provide grants to really smaller startups that really could use, $10,000 is something that's really meaningful. The larger nonprofits, it's just not going to have as much impact. So that is something to keep in mind. We are focused on nonprofits that are dedicated to providing meaningful services and programs to women and children, and especially women of color. That's definitely something we look for. It honors Shauna's legacy. I told you about her, and how important it is that this is all in her name. So we want to continue her work and really be sure that the nonprofit is making a difference in the community that it serves, or communities that it serves. We do this annual, so it's every fall, that is the grant competition. And then it's not just writing a quality grant, you also have to get your supporters to then vote online. So we narrow it down to 3 finalists, and then it's all about the online voting. So it's really important to engage your community. And we really like this side of it because grassroots organizing is a big part of effective government engagement and advocacy work. So, and I think people like to have a voice in the process. And so, whether it's the people you serve, donors, members of the board, getting all kinds of people to just click, it really takes less than a minute to just go online and click the vote. It makes a huge difference. So that is how it operates every fall. And then it closes with this Opening Doors to Giving event, which is an online event where we not just announce the winner, we also honor the finalists, the semifinalists. And then this year we did last fall, we did a special recognition. We highlighted some additional nonprofits, all in the effort of trying to raise a profile. So maybe others who are dialing in, who are following the Shauna M. Sorrells program, they can then make contributions to these organizations. And we even, this last fall, we tried to do a matching program where if the nonprofits that were the semifinalists could raise $500 in 3 days, the rest of the week following that event, we would then match it. And so that was a way to try and get some more donations in. So we're really trying to spark more contributions to these smaller nonprofits through this event as well. And so, and then throughout the year, we do a lot of programming around nonprofits, trying to help them, coach them through ways to access funding, ways to shape policies, and just be stronger organizations. And so we're, over the years, as we grow this program, we're going to try and do more and more with that under the Shauna M. Sorrells program. So that's the overview. And I think now I am passing it on to the next slide and on to Greg Capcar.
Sorry, Liz. Actually, you have these slides all the way through Carrie's portion.
I am sorry. I'm messing up. So anyway, so these are all the folks that got the special recognition, which was new in the fall. So you can see their logos and websites, all really great organizations. And we just wanted to make sure that we were raising the profile of more groups, not just the finalists. So that's why we called out these organizations. So next slide, please. Here are the semifinalists. We had a few more semifinalists than we did the first year that we launched this program. So again, impressive group, and we just want to make sure that we were highlighting them. And then this year we gave 500 to each, and then started that matching program. So hopefully that got more people engaged. Next slide, please. And then the finalists. So the Haven Home and Suited for Change, great organizations. They each got $1,000. So really everyone is a winner. And doing really great things to help people, to make a difference. And so we wanted to make sure we were recognizing them. And then our grand prize winner was, next slide, please. Seeds of Literacy. And so today we have Carrie Klein from the Seeds of Literacy organization. And we'd love to have her give a little bit of background on Seeds of Literacy, the work that you do, and then also just your experience of applying for the grant, any insights that you might have for others who are trying to get it next year. That would be super helpful. So with that, I'd love to pass it over to Carrie Klein.
Right, so I'm Carrie from Seeds of Literacy. We are located in Cleveland, and we offer adult basic education. We educate around 1,000 adult students every year. And due to the pandemic, like many of you, I'm sure, we were forced to take our program online, and we established a virtual classroom. The virtual classroom has just been successful beyond all of our expectations. The small nonprofit from Cleveland is now reaching people across the country and beyond. And in fact, we had our first international graduate last week. So we're very excited about that. And this funding in particular is really helping us take a planful approach to how we will expand and enhance the virtual classroom this year. As far as my experience with the application process, I just wanted to start by saying, what I really truly appreciated and what I think makes this opportunity in particular so special is that Liz and the team have maintained such a strong connection between Shauna's accomplishments and passions and the intent of the grant. My colleagues and I were really touched by Shauna's story and Liz's commitment to continuing Shauna's legacy through the foundation. I encourage all of you just to do a quick Google search of Shauna's name, and you will find some really, really great stories about how she touched the lives of not only those she served, but everyone around her, really, her colleagues and her friends and the greater community have a lot of wonderful things to say about her. Like any proposal, the most important thing is to really make sure that your program or your organization's work really aligns with the intent of the funding. And if there is a fit, make sure you talk about it and you make it explicit, right? I think as writers, sometimes we really know the fit in our head. We have to make sure that we're making that clear to our readers. And share very specifically how your program or your project is going to help further Shauna's vision for creating impact and change. A really great way to do this is to share a participant story. That can really help paint a clear picture of who you serve, how, and why. The other thing that I would encourage is just to be honest, talk about any challenges your organization or your participants are facing, funding related, COVID related. There's so many things going on right now. Don't be afraid to talk about them. All of our organizations and all of us really in general have struggled over the last couple of years in some way, shape, or form. And I have found myself moving away from more of that formal structure and tone in my proposals and just being real. And I think that this opportunity in particular is a space where the reviewers really appreciate that. And of course, be clear with how you intend to use the funds and what you plan to accomplish with the funding. I thought also very quickly it might be helpful to share some insight on the voting component. So we really engaged every audience, our students. We have a very strong volunteer base, our board members, all of our stakeholders really, and our personal networks too. And we segmented our communication for each of those audiences. We asked others to share with their networks. That was very helpful. We got a lot of feedback from people who were forwarding the email to their friends or even across their businesses asking for our votes. Like Liz mentioned, this is a really easy way for people to get involved. We used all the typical channels: social media, website, emails. The other thing, I think that sometimes voting can seem a little bit overwhelming. And it does require some time and attention, right? That component of voting initiatives. And sometimes you have to get a communications person on board from your organization as well. But what is so great about this opportunity in particular is that it's really just a one and done, right? And we really highlighted that in our communications. I think so often now you come across voting initiatives where you're asking people over and over every day, will you vote for us? You know, vote multiple times in the day. And this is just one and done, so it's quick and it's easy. And you know, I think that makes it really different from the others. So I hope that that was helpful, and I'm happy to answer any questions at the end of the webinar.
That was awesome. Thank you so much. So helpful. Really, really good insights.
Great. Thanks, Carrie. And I'm going to go ahead and kick it over. Braden, if you can give us the next slide, please. And I'll just give a quick background. My name is Greg Capcar, and I work with G2G. I've been here for about 5 years. My background is in really kind of the health and human service world, and I've been immersed in nonprofits pretty much my entire career, and worked with a large nonprofit in the Cleveland area where we were successful in actually securing grants similar to this, and we were able to get grant money to actually fund a government relations program, which then went on to be successful at collecting and garnering state money from the operating budget and the capital budget, as well as federal appropriations. And we're going to actually talk a little bit about that later on. Becky's going to cover some of those items as well. But this is just such an amazing program that G2G has, and building on what Carrie has shared. And I really valued, Carrie, the fact that you talked about how you managed the social media component of that, as well as kind of your insights into how your organization approached applying for this. And a lot of what you have said really ties back to this key factors slide that we have here on making a strong application. And we share this not only for the Shauna M. Sorrells Award, but also that you can use these types of factors and tips for applying for other grants, not just the one through G2G. And first and foremost, definitely having a familiarity with the grant's purpose and background, and really aligning the two. And one of the things that we often recommend to companies and nonprofits that are going after grants is to actually reach out, if you can, to the organization or the solicitor of a grant, just to get a sense of what they are looking for, and so they know who you are. But definitely wanting to align it with the purpose and the background of the grant is really important. And we had a team of reviewers inside and outside of G2G. So this was kind of a peer-reviewed application process. And these are kind of some tips from the reviewers that go into this. And I should have started off by saying all of the applications were just phenomenal. And as reviewers, it made it really difficult to, you've got to have some parameters to decide, okay, who's going to ultimately win, because not everybody can win. And so some things that really jumped out at us were the proposals that had a clear and succinct explanation of specifically how the organization was going to use the money and how that tied back to the purpose of the grant. And it was easy to see when you've got like a couple next to each other, when someone kind of went that extra mile and really tailored and customized their work and how it aligned with the goal of the Shauna M. Sorrells program, as opposed to having a boilerplate response that is used for other grant applications, or that just is easily copied and pasted from the organization's website. So really kind of going that extra mile and putting that extra effort into it. The other thing that we looked for and really helped when organizations talked about was how the money was actually going to be used. And again, tying that back to the purpose of the grant itself. We also want to stress that, and you think that it might be intuitive, but just to follow instructions. That's very, very important, especially if there's a word limit in grant applications. If you're not hitting the word limit, then it can be an easy, when you're faced with really, really good applications, it becomes one of those factors of, well, they just didn't follow instructions, so they're out of the running. We kind of touch on this multiple times, and I think this is a thread that runs through all of these recommendations, is to really demonstrate the impact of the funds. And the better applications, the ones that rose to the top, were able to really succinctly talk about not only how those funds had an impact inside the organization, but also extended that to the community or to other entities, or just kind of overall the general impact of the funds. In this particular case, Liz described Shauna's phenomenal work in the housing industry. Obviously, this was beyond just housing, but also there is a component to this award that is specifically geared toward organizations that are helping underserved populations, especially women, African American, and Latinx. And so to the extent that organizations touched on that and just didn't ignore that, that helped elevate proposals to the top of the list. And I've already talked a little bit about going the extra mile and just kind of making it pop and stick for all of the reviewers. So I'm gonna kick it over to my teammate, Becky Watts. And before I do that though, I did wanna mention, because I saw in the chat that there was a question about the recording. Yes, we'll certainly make this recording and the slides available. And typically we'll upload these to our website and make those available. And I envision us sending out another MailChimp or so to alert folks that it's on the website, but you'll have to give us a few days to get that up on the site. So with that, I'm gonna pause there and turn it over to Becky Watts. And I think we can go to the next slide, Braden.
Thanks, Greg. So I'm Becky Watts. I'm also with G2G. I've worked with Liz for nearly 15 years. I am based in our Midwest office, although I work for G2G, our DC office as well, after working on Capitol Hill for half a dozen years in the United States Senate, working on appropriations and government funding, specifically for organizations who were coming to Congress at the time to shape and change the appropriations bills. And a lot of that was done through the earmark process, which I will talk about a little bit more in a few minutes. Prior to being in the Senate, I worked at the state government level in Ohio. So, I've worked on government in and around government for a long time, and so many of the principles and the concepts that are being discussed here today in terms of applying and aligning with various grant opportunities, RFPs, requests for proposals, is applicable when you are going through government as well. So we wanted to take this opportunity to just share that with all of you as you're thinking about other, government funding, pots of funding that you haven't considered before, or have not succeeded in accessing dollars through. And part of that is here on this slide, tips for seeking government funding. There are several components of it. Tracking, shaping, and applying are all some of the key components. Tracking is first and foremost pretty key when you're looking at what opportunities are available through government, and certainly government grants through all the federal agencies are a huge opportunity. State agencies have government grants as well, that's a little more decentralized of a way of tracking, depending on which state your organization is headquartered in. But in terms of federal government, there is a website, grants.gov, that puts out grants every single day, and that is one way to follow what's available. It's also a searchable website. although that can be a bit cumbersome and challenging to do. But agency websites also offer opportunities for you to get on their newsletters, their listservs, and just checking on those and kind of tracking what's available and seeing if your organization, your mission, those you serve, it aligns with those opportunities. Shaping is another big thing that we do in our profession in terms of working with Congress, working directly with legislators, policymakers at the state and local government levels as well, in addition to Congress. And then talking, as Greg kind of mentioned, talking directly with program managers or, in cases of applying for non-government funding, and talking directly with foundation, related program managers and philanthropy, those in that world. And I know a lot of you who work in development, that's exactly what you do. So it's very similar and applicable in the policy world. And those folks are, they're paid by taxpayers. So, starting with your own legislators, people who represent your organization directly, is a great place to start. And they can often help link you with the best people to talk to in terms of what state or federal agency aligns with your mission, and how you can work directly with them on finding out what potential funding opportunities are coming down the pike, where perhaps there needs to be more funding, and making that message clear. And then finally applying. And again, many of the principles we've already covered today, following directions, being aware of deadlines, listening into the webinars that agencies often offer in advance of a grant deadline, making sure you go through that process to make sure that you are in fact meeting the needs of the intended, the grant and the funding. And then finally, you're getting letters of support, not only from your constituencies, but directly from your legislators. Sometimes getting state legislators to help support state grants, getting your federal members of Congress to support your applications to federal agencies also can be very influential and key in the process. So that's why developing those relationships before you have an ask can be helpful. Next slide, please. So we wanted to talk a little bit, since we have you, about the federal earmark process, because it's something that you may want to consider. It was a process that was banned for about the past decade in Congress, but was used widely and prolifically prior to that by members of Congress. And this past year, it has come back into action. So Congress has reinstituted the earmark process and trying to do it in a much more transparent way. So there's fewer bad apples, if you will. And the U.S. House of Representatives, they called it community project funding. You can see at the top of the slide there. And the United States Senate called it congressionally directed spending. So basically the same exact process, but just two different names. So who is eligible for this process if you were to consider doing it and pursuing it? Nonprofits, colleges, universities, state or local government entities, for-profit organizations are no longer eligible to apply for funding through this mechanism. What types of things qualify? Well, they're looking for 1-year funding requests. Not all funding is requires matching dollars, but it depends on which pot of funding you're going through. However, it can be very, very helpful to show we have a shovel-ready project or programming in place that needs some additional funding from the government to shore it up or to continue it, that type of thing. So to show, it kind of helps with just showing you're a credible organization if you already got other funding to match that which you are seeking through Congress. How much funding you can request really depends, anywhere from $50,000 to $3 million, even more than that in some cases. But typically that's kind of the range that we were seeing. And what makes a successful budget ask? Again, alignment with the particular member of Congress and their priorities is very, very key, as we have seen. And then community support. Letters from your board members, from the people that you serve, indicating that they want this project to be funded can be very, very powerful and impactful in the project or in the process. I'm sorry. Key timing. Really now in January is when you should be thinking about this and starting to have conversations with your members of Congress and their staff. And then finding out when their actual deadlines are. The deadlines are typically February, March timeframe for you to actually submit a form. They have a form. Each member of Congress has a different form, but they can be very similar. And getting those applications in the next really month or so. And then after that, it's a little bit out of your hands, although continued engagement with that office is critical, and advocacy and kind of letters of support, even coming in after the deadlines, can be very helpful. And just staying in touch and making sure they're having a sort of what we call a drumbeat of communication with the congressional offices. And typically the process wraps up toward the end of the calendar year, but that can vary year to year. Next slide, please. I think that concludes my portion, and I am going to turn it back to Liz for some final tips on all the processes we've talked about today. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Becky. So just some final tips to succeed in accessing government funding, the Shauna Sorrells grant, many grants, foundation grants. I mean, this really is broader. Know your funding needs, absolutely understand what you need funding for. Prioritize that list, because I'm sure you need funding for several things, but really prioritize and clarify that, I think, is a really important first step. You want to personalize and align your application with the SMS grant or whichever grant you're applying for. And you heard Carrie talk about how she Googled Shauna Sorrells. She looked into who this person was and why this program was created. And I think that made a big difference in their application for Seeds of Literacy. So really important to personalize. Research is really important in doing that. You want to answer all the questions that are being asked as precisely and concisely as possible. I would say for this program in particular, it's interesting. I've had conversations with program managers in government agencies who have said some of these programs have almost half the applications end up in the trash because they didn't follow directions. So or answer the questions directly. So just really make sure that you're doing that. And then you're meeting the deadline. Every year, I always get a couple emails of like, oh, I didn't see this until it was too late. And we're strict about that. And I think everyone is when it comes to deadline. So really making sure that you can meet that deadline is important. For earmarks and government grants, you want to develop a list of targets to pursue. And so, as Becky was talking about, the targets can be the member of Congress that you submit an earmark request with. It can be the agency that you want to go after for funding. For example, like Department of Education, let's say you're going after trying to get an education grant, you can usually see the point of contact on that grant package. And so even if the date has passed, deadline's passed, you can still pursue that person. You could send an email and ask for a call and try to develop a relationship and get information before making a submission. I think that can really help improve your chances when it comes to government grants anyway. And it's the same with foundations. If you can talk to someone and really have a a conversation about what exactly they're looking to fund, that is also going to increase your chances. We actually helped one of our nonprofits get capacity building grant from a foundation by taking the time to really study the foundation and what they're willing to spend money on, and then give them a tailored application, and it worked. We actually got funding for it. And so they used that capacity building funding to then pay us at G2G to then go after government funding for them. So there are lots of things that you can do to really strengthen your chances. And so what else do we have in here? We have make sure you meet the criteria. That I think is a no-brainer. Communicate succinct summaries of what you do, why valuable, how we'll use the funding. I think that across the board is really important for whether you're talking to government, foundations, or this SMS program. And as you'll see with the Shauna Sorrells program, we purposely have very short answers that we're seeking. We limit the words so that it is really right to the point. So I think in these days, there's so many communications flying around. Brevity is really valued quite highly. You want to build relationships, as I mentioned. One way to do that is look at that point of contact on a grant. Another way is just good old-fashioned Googling. There are ways to find people inside of government that are controlling different funds. And then obviously with foundations, same thing. And all these different sources, I think it can be really helpful to find out what it is they're looking to fund, what are their priorities, so that you can really align with that. Inviting folks for tours and even media events, all that's really well received, especially politicians. Public officials like to have media coverage. They like to do tours and see people in person and see how the program works and why you need funding and what funding will do. I think that's especially important for an earmark request. And then engaging the community you serve. And that's a big part of why we have the online voting, because we want the whole community behind the nonprofit. And so that's a big part of the Shauna Sorrells program. But then for these other grant opportunities that you're pursuing, letters of support can go a long way. Even having maybe some of these other supporters participate in a Zoom call where you're explaining what the organization does and why you need funding to, let's say, a government target. Having some of those outsiders that are strongly supporting you can really be helpful, can really give you credibility and show that there is this broad community support. Following up and staying in touch is always good with any fundraising efforts. I think that's really important. And, I'll say with these semifinalists and finalists, I've definitely kept in touch, some more than others. And, we went on to provide sort of one-on-one coaching on going after funding, on making connections to folks. So we definitely want to help those that are moving through this program. We see anyone who's part of this program is part of the Shauna Sorrells family. And, we want to be a resource and to help you. And so keeping in touch with us is always warmly welcomed. And with that, I think the final 3 words, never give up. Very, very important. It can be a long and arduous process going after funding and fundraising, and you just got to stick with it. You got to get a lot of no's before you get a yes. So just part of the process. So I think with that, there's one last slide that just has our contact information. So Greg, Becky, and I are happy to correspond over email or, however you'd like after, if you have other questions. And then just keep on the watch, because we do other webinars and we do a much deeper dive actually on government funding for nonprofits. So, if you want to sign up for those in the future, or like I said, if we can just be a resource, just keep in touch. And then in the fall, before you know it, it will be the next Shauna Sorrells grant application process. So stay tuned for that. So with that, I think we can take the slides down and just have a conversation. We would love to take your questions and hear or thoughts for us, for Carrie. So the floor is open.
So I'm going to field some questions from the chat box. So Somebody had asked that we show Becky's last slide again, that before the end. So maybe as we're going through some of these other questions, Braden, if you could pull that back up and go to Becky's last slide. And then in the meantime, Becky, this question is for you. Should we apply for earmarks with each of our rep or only one?
Great question. So, our general approach to that is, if your organization is serving a footprint that extends beyond just one member of Congress, then yes, I would definitely talk to multiple members of Congress and just understand their process, how they work together. If they work together, perhaps they don't, and consider tailoring your request to, again, sort of their priorities. And if your organization is doing something with their constituents that aligns with what that members of Congress's priorities are, then yeah, I would submit it in multiple places in a tailored way if possible. And again, it's they're trying, members of Congress are looking at this as a way to bring federal dollars back to their districts, and they want to be part of this process. If many of them approach it this way, not all, but that if this process is going on, they're gonna participate and bring dollars back to their communities and their constituencies.
Great, thank you. Carrie, this question is for you, and it comes from an organization asking, can you talk a little bit about, do you have a large grant writing team, or do you apply for other grants, or how did you kind of manage the workload to do this and compare that to the size of your organization?
Sure. So we're relatively small for a nonprofit. We use volunteers to the max, any way and any form possible. We operate on we're about $1 million operating budget. So that kind of gives you an idea of our size, but I am a full-time grant writer for the organization. There's not a lot of government support, unfortunately, for adult education. So we rely almost 100% on philanthropic support. And a lot of that support comes from foundations. So for us, it is really important that we have a full-time person devoted to grant writing. And I will say though, for me, I rely really heavily on our program team. And I think to be successful as a grant writer, you have to, right? Because, your proposal is only going to be as good as the program information and your outcomes and that you have to share. So, really engaging the program people, I think, is important. And, so much so that I actually, for the award sort of ceremony that we had via Zoom with G2G, I brought one of my program people to actually represent our organization, because they often speak so passionately and so well about, what the organization does, that I think that they play a really important role.
Great, that's awesome. Liz, this question is for you. What are ways that organizations can communicate with program managers and kind of break through that barrier?
Yeah, so they're just people, and they work for us, right? Because we're taxpayers, so just keep that in mind. Although I know it can be a little bit intimidating, but I think, like I said previously, you can find program managers. They're usually listed as the point of contact on the grant package. Also on the website for the agency, they often list people. There's even some directories, so you can find, and you can just cold call or cold email and say a short email, not a long one, about 1 or 2 sentences about what you do and that you'd like to set up a call just to learn more about their program, what they're doing, and to see if it's a fit. And then when you do the call, it'll probably be a Zoom call. Everything seems to be these days. And then you would want to do a short PowerPoint that just educates them on what you're doing. And then they can ask questions. They can say, well, that's really not a fit. This is what we're doing. Or this part aligns with us, this part doesn't. There should be another funding opportunity coming out. Watch for it. We expect it in May, or, whatever, like those types of insights that you'll only get when you talk to people. You'll never get that off a website. And the other thing is, some programs are two-pronged, where they might have some kind of initial review. I think that's mostly NSF and Department of Defense, but where they kind of do a shorter pre-proposal or letter of inquiry, something like that. And then from there, invite people to then do full proposals. So that would be another reason to have those relationships, so that they're looking for you. Most grants are independently reviewed, so you're not going to really influence that part of it, but you certainly can get insights on things to emphasize, things to really make sure that you cover. And some program managers can be very generous with their time, and they'll take a look at like a 1 to 3 pager. They are not going to look at a full application, but they might look at a few pages and tell you, yeah, you're on the right track, or yeah, you know what, I think you need to focus more on this, or I'm seeing this missing. We've definitely been able to finagle getting that kind of input for clients that we've worked with, and it's been really helpful. So
that's great. This is for any of you. How do you recommend showing community support, whether it be for Shauna M. Sorrells or for another government grant, or even for an earmark? What are ways to show community support?
Becky, you want to go?
Sure. I mean, I think there's a few mechanisms. I mean, so social media we've talked about is one thing. Sending letter, for one example that comes to mind in an earmark success that we had was an organization that we asked, after submitting a proposal through a member of Congress's office, we said to the nonprofit, we said, hey, let's get just 100 support letters flooding into this senator's office, because he's getting requests from the entire state. So we want to show like this project is going to be very meaningful for this particular section of the state, and it's going to influence a lot of people, or it's going to impact a lot of people. So we want to make sure he's hearing from those members of the community. So board members, staff members, and the constituency of the organization all sent letters into his email system. They sent handwritten letters. We just really tried to up the ante that way, and just show the impact. So that's another way I would recommend.
Great. Any thought on the grant side of things, Liz, as to how to show community support or talk about community support in a grant?
Yeah, I mean, everything Becky said, by the way, it really works. That one example she's talking about, they actually made it, was very, very competitive, thousands. And they made it because that, I think a big part of it was that sort of grassroots effort. So by the way, it does work. Yeah, I don't know, Carrie, do you have other ideas on sort of ways to show that community support coalition? I don't know.
The one thing that came to my mind was through partnerships. I've also done a lot of federal grants over the course of my career, and I know that that's always a way to, make yourself stand out, and then also help your funder see that the funding isn't just going to support your mission, but it's going to support all of these organizations that you're working with, unitedly for one purpose, and to really help the people that you serve.
Wonderful. We had a question about earmarks, and this was from, this is in relation to would an international-led project working with American nonprofits at a local congressional district level be able to target earmarks for funding?
I do not think so. If the funding is going internationally or to the organization, and the organization is an international organization, not through most of the domestic agencies. I'm not sure if USA, I actually don't know. I'd have to follow up on whether or not USAID, for example, or the State Department, if Congress was doing any earmarks this time around since they reinstituted earmarks. I don't know, Liz, if you know the answer to that.
Yeah, I agree. And I guess we're still waiting to see what will happen. This, I shouldn't say this year because they should have done it last year, but yeah, in this process, the current process, we're still not sure. I think everything hinges on that. If they keep those earmarks in, then I think they're back, and they will be back this year and in full force, and they'll probably keep growing. Yeah, so we just don't know yet.
The other thing I would add to that is it would probably be on a case-by-case basis that maybe those individual nonprofits need to take the lead to go after the money, but I don't think it, so like if it's, let's just say American Heart Association, if there's a Cleveland chapter of the American Heart Association, maybe they as their own individual nonprofit goes after an earmark through whatever area they're in. Does that sound possibly like that's right?
Yeah, definitely. I guess when I was thinking when he said an international led project,
Right. Yeah.
if
So
that's the fiscal agent, that's where you run into challenges, I think.
Yep. Yeah, definitely. There was a question here about grant writing, and so maybe Carrie, this would be for you. So for a small nonprofit with a volunteer board members and no employees, if we were to opt for a full-time grant writer as staff, what salary range should we budget for?
Yeah, I think Liz provided a really great response to that in the comments. But without knowing too much about the organization, and I will say I've had like long conversations about this particular subject with many nonprofits, but I think I would recommend too, just really looking overall at what your needs are, because potentially, you know, if you are really small and you're just starting to dip your toe into fundraising, maybe somebody who has experience with all the different facets of fundraising, like a development director or somebody who knows grant writing and understands the foundation world, but can also help you tap into individual donors and some corporate donors as well, might be a good route for you too.
Okay, it looks like we have I'm not seeing any other questions, so I don't know if there are any last remarks that folks want to make.
Just thank you all for all that you're doing to make a difference in the world. It really is meaningful. And as tough as it can be as a smaller nonprofit, know that we are here to support you, and we are rooting for you, and we want to help you. So let us know if there's anything we can do, and stay tuned for more Shauna M. Sorrells programming. And the fall will be the next round for the grant competition. Anyone else want to say anything? No. Thank you so much, Carrie. You're awesome. I thought your insights were perfect. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
Thanks,
Thank
Carrie.
you all.
Everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.